Bad boy ain't good, but good boy ain't fun. You might think Depression-era heiress Barbara Hutton was the living embodiment of that idea, but you would be wrong. After 7 failed marriages, handing over tens of millions of dollars to abusers and fortune hunters, and dying alone with just $3,500 to her name, Barbara's problem was never simply a terrible taste in low-quality men. That was only the surface. Behind those 7 marital tragedies lay a generational trauma. She was deprived of the ability to love, and then handed a colossal fortune without ever being taught how to navigate it. Barbara did not just destroy her own life. She unknowingly passed that exact same tragedy down to her only child. The story of Barbara Hutton will completely change how you look at the value of money, the weight of childhood wounds, and the true cost of a healthy kind of love. The child who found her mother. To understand why a woman who could afford the crowns of the Romanov dynasty kept giving her heart to fortune hunters, we have to go back to the morning of May 2, 1917. The setting is a lavish Upper East Side apartment in New York. That morning, a 4-year-old girl walked into her mother's bedroom. Lying motionless on the silk sheets was Edna Woolworth. She was the middle daughter of retail magnate Frank Woolworth. She was dead at the age of 33. The official cause of death was listed as suffocation from mastoiditis. But in the quiet corridors of New York high society, a different story spread rapidly. Rumors suggested Edna had poisoned herself after discovering her husband had brought a mistress into their home yet again. Newspapers at the time reported that a maid found the body. However, family records and respected biographers later confirmed a different reality. The first person to see that lifeless body was little Barbara. What happens to the mind of a 4-year-old child when she sees the mother she loves most in the world lying there, never to wake up again? The tragedy did not stop there. To protect the image of the F.W. Woolworth empire and keep company stock from plummeting, the family allegedly used their financial influence to cover up the details. No comprehensive autopsy was ever performed. Edna's death was quickly erased from conversation. People were strictly forbidden from mentioning the late mother's name in front of Barbara. That suffocating silence planted a cruel idea in the little girl's mind. It taught her that the loss was her fault and that pain was something you had to hide. Barbara's father, Franklin Laws Hutton, did not step into the void his wife left behind to protect his daughter. Franklin was a handsome man and a partner at the brokerage firm E.F. Hutton. He was also a heavy drinker who treated women like playthings. After his wife's death, he continued his romantic escapades and practically abandoned his duties as a father. Franklin sent Barbara away from one place to another. The young girl was shuffled through a series of boarding schools. She stayed with aunts and uncles, or lived in luxury hotel rooms cared for by a revolving door of nannies. Franklin's only real presence in his daughter's life was as her trust fund manager. He was incredibly gifted at making money grow. But emotionally, he was completely frozen toward his only child. The only person who gave Barbara any warmth during her early years was her grandfather, Frank Woolworth. He called her his princess and showered her with anything money could buy. But when Barbara was just 6 years old, her grandfather died as well. Once again, the only source of safety in her life vanished. Psychologists would look at Barbara's case as a textbook example of anxious and avoidant attachment. A child abandoned by a living father, stripped of a mother through tragedy, and then robbed of a protective grandfather, will develop deep emotional wounds. She grew up with an unspoken belief. She believed that love always comes with loss or abandonment. She felt she was not good enough to be loved simply for who she was. To keep someone around, she believed she had to offer them something in exchange. Barbara grew up in a world where she had the most expensive toys, but lacked the presence of an adult who truly cared for her. She was a wealthy orphan living inside her own family. And when she turned 21, this damaged psychological foundation was handed the most dangerous fuel on earth, a massive fortune. The curse of sudden wealth. In November 1933, America was suffering through the darkest days of the Great Depression. Millions of families stood in long lines just waiting for a free bowl of soup. Meanwhile, Barbara Hutton turned 21. Under the terms of her grandfather's will and the inheritance from her late mother, Barbara gained full control of an estate estimated at $42 to $50 million. Adjusted for inflation today, that figure equals more than $1 billion. Overnight, she became one of the wealthiest women on the planet. But how was she prepared to receive this fortune? She had no training in wealth management. She had no father to teach her about personal boundaries, how to read a ledger, or how to tell the difference between a true friend and a fortune hunter. Her father may have helped double her money on the stock market, but he never taught her the value of a dollar. She was thrust into the real world with vast wealth, but possessed the emotional capacity and life skills of an abandoned 4-year-old. Modern psychology refers to this as sudden wealth syndrome, when an individual receives an overwhelming amount of money without the psychological or practical preparation to handle it. That wealth does not bring freedom. It becomes a poison. Barbara's clumsy and thoughtless approach to money had already revealed itself 3 years earlier, during her debutante ball at age 18. Her father spent $60,000, a staggering sum in 1930, to turn the Ritz-Carlton Hotel into a maze of magnolia flowers. 4 orchestras took turns playing through the night. Champagne flowed freely. As they left, every guest from New York's elite society received a small gift box containing uncut diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. Outside on the streets of New York, people were starving. This tasteless display of extravagance sparked a massive wave of public outrage. Newspapers printed stories of the ball right next to photos of breadlines. The press began calling her the poor little rich girl. The public did not pity her. They mocked and resented her. She became a symbol of the greed and wastefulness of the ultra-rich. That experience left Barbara with a subconscious sense of guilt about her wealth. She was terrified of the public's hatred. Yet, at the same time, she did not know how to use her money for anything other than showing off and giving it away. Almost immediately, a flock of social parasites caught the scent of the young heiress's naive desire for acceptance. Flatterers, art dealers, estate managers, and especially men carrying the titles of faded European aristocracy began to circle her. Barbara started using money the only way she knew how. She used it to fill her inner emptiness and to buy people's presents. She wrote blank checks to new acquaintances. She would easily take off a Cartier diamond ring or an expensive fur coat and hand it to a maid who simply complimented it. Behind this wild generosity was not pure charity, but a reactionary defense mechanism. Barbara was using her estate to broadcast a subconscious message. Please do not hate me. Look, I am giving you everything. Please just stay with me. Money did not heal Barbara's childhood wounds. It only magnified them millions of times over. It robbed her of the ability to see people's true nature. And nowhere was this emotional blindness exposed more cruelly than in the men she chose to let into her life. A pattern of destructive men. A quick glance at the list of Barbara Hutton's 7 husbands might make you shake your head and dismiss her entirely. It is easy to assume this woman simply liked polished bad boys and European royal titles to cover up the fact that her family's wealth came from 5 and dime stores. But there is a much deeper psychological truth at play. Let us look at the bigger picture of the men who walked through Barbara's life. It all started with Alexis Mdivani. He was a self-proclaimed prince from Georgia who lured her into a scandal-ridden marriage when she was barely 20 years old. On their wedding night, instead of showing his young wife any tenderness, he coldly looked at her figure and called her too fat. That cruel insult instantly triggered the anorexia that would consume her body for the rest of her life. After that, he casually drained over $2 million from her accounts to buy polo ponies and luxury estates before leaving her just 2 years later. But the nightmare with Mdivani was only the beginning. Her second husband was Danish Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Reventlow, and he brought a much more terrifying level of cruelty. Reventlow controlled Barbara through extreme physical abuse. He beat her so severely she required hospitalization. He forced her to renounce her American citizenship just to dodge taxes on the wealth he was targeting. In the end, he extorted her for $5 million and fought her for custody of their child. By the time her 4th husband appeared, a faded aristocrat and race car driver named Prince Igor Trubetskoy, the pattern was set. He quickly grew tired of Barbara's worsening mental instability and walked away as soon as he received a handsome financial settlement. The heiress's emotional collapse then made her easy prey for Porfirio Rubirosa. He was a world-famous playboy who entered her life when Barbara's body had withered to less than 90 pounds. Their marriage lasted a mere 53 days, but that was plenty of time for Rubirosa to walk away with a coffee plantation, a converted B-bomber aircraft, a string of polo ponies, and over $2 million in cash. And finally, there were her sixth and seventh husbands, Baron Gottfried von Krem and Prince Don Vin na Champasak. Although they held titles and were somewhat kinder, they were entirely distant. They were completely powerless to pull a deeply broken Barbara out of the wreckage of her own life. Why would a woman who had already been exploited by a gold-digging prince walk straight into the arms of an abusive count, and then say yes to a professional fortune hunter like Rubirosa? The answer lies in a psychological phenomenon Sigmund Freud called repetition compulsion. When a person suffers a severe childhood trauma, specifically being abandoned by a cold and philandering father, their brain is subconsciously drawn to individuals who possess those exact same destructive traits. Barbara was not so naive that she did not know Rubirosa or Reventlow wanted her money. She knew it perfectly well. But in her wounded mind, the coldness, control, and cruelty of these men felt familiar. It was a familiarity trap. Her father was a womanizer who disrespected women and cared only for wealth. Because of that, a man who was genuinely caring, sincere, and peaceful felt alien to Barbara. He would have actually terrified her. She needed a man just like her father to replay the old script. Only this time, she carried a subconscious hope. She hoped that if she were better behaved, and if she gave them more money, they would not abandon her the way her father did. Add to that the mechanism of intermittent reinforcement. Men like Midivani and Rubirosa were masters of emotional manipulation. They would alternate between incredibly sweet gestures and sudden, cold humiliation. That constant emotional roller coaster created a trauma bond that was highly addictive. Barbara mistook the tension, the anxiety, and the desperate feeling of having to fight to keep a man for passionate love. Furthermore, she suffered from a need for self-verification. Deep down, Barbara believed she was worthless and had nothing to offer but money. So, when she was with men who treated her like a walking credit card, her mind felt validated. The fortune hunters simply confirmed the darkest beliefs she held about herself. Barbara's taste in men was never just a preference. It was a symptom. It was the cry for help of a 4-year-old child trying to use millions of dollars to buy the attention of a father who never looked back, pushing away the only good man. If you need the most devastating piece of evidence to prove that Barbara could not tolerate a healthy kind of love, that evidence is named Cary Grant. In 1941, Barbara met the legendary Hollywood movie star Cary Grant. In stark contrast to her previous and future husbands, Cary Grant was financially independent. He earned over $300,000 a year, an absolute fortune at the time. He did not need a European title, and, most importantly, he did not need a single dime of Barbara's money. When they married in 1942, the press mockingly dubbed them Cash and Cary. But the media was completely wrong. Cary Grant was the only husband in Barbara's life who insisted on signing a prenuptial agreement, waiving all rights to the Woolworth fortune. He never asked for an estate, a private plane, or even $1,000 from her. Cary Grant genuinely cared for Barbara. He tried to build a warm, stable home life in California. He spent time playing with and caring for Lance, Barbara's son, from her previous marriage. He offered the boy a sincerity he had never received from his own biological father. Grant tried desperately to pull Barbara out of her sleeping pill addiction and her anorexia. But that marriage only lasted 3 years. What went wrong? Why, when she finally met a genuinely good man, someone honest, wealthy, disciplined, and protective, did Barbara intentionally destroy the relationship? This is the tragic peak of her self-sabotage. When she was with Cary Grant, the only tool Barbara knew how to use to control people completely lost its power. That tool was her money. Cary Grant refused expensive gifts. He grew irritated when she carelessly handed over a fur coat to a servant. He paid all of his own bills. The fact that money could not buy Cary Grant pushed Barbara into a severe identity crisis. She was confused and terrified. She constantly wondered why he was with her if he did not need her money. She obsessed over how she would know when he might get bored of her and leave. For someone with such deep abandonment wounds, sitting around waiting for a partner to leave is an unbearable psychological torture. To regain a sense of control, her brain activated a defense mechanism. She had to push him away first. She had to ruin the marriage before he realized she was hollow inside and abandoned her. Barbara started staying out all night, partying. She lived recklessly, refused to eat, and drowned herself in pills just to provoke him. Cary Grant's discipline, his healthy habits, and his steady routine made Barbara feel threatened. Safety was a strange and frightening landscape to her. She only knew how to survive in chaos. They divorced amicably in 1945. When he left, Cary Grant refused any alimony. He returned all the expensive gifts she had given him during their time together and never spoke a single bad word about her to the press. Until the end of his life, he always regarded her with a gentle sort of pity. The collapse of her marriage to Cary Grant is the most devastating revelation of Barbara's life. She was not an unlucky victim who kept stumbling into bad men. She actively rejected a healthy relationship because she lacked the emotional language to participate in it. Right after pushing Cary Grant away, Barbara immediately retreated into her toxic comfort zone. She threw herself into the arms of Prince Igor Trubetskoy, and then Porfirio Rubirosa. She went back to paying for fake smiles and buying hollow titles. Because in a world of transactions, she felt she was in control. And most tragically of all, this pattern of self-destruction did not stop with her. Passing down the trauma to Lance. In the study of family psychology, intergenerational trauma is often described like a fire. If the older generation does not face it and extinguish it, the flames will automatically spread to the next generation. The only child to carry Barbara Hutton's bloodline was Lance Reventlow. He was the product of her abusive marriage to Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Reventlow. Lance was born in London in 1936 during a delivery that nearly cost Barbara her life. The press dubbed Lance the richest baby in the world. But from the moment he cried his first breath, he was not a child loved purely for who he was. He was a financial tool. When the marriage between Barbara and the Count imploded, Reventlow used Lance as a hostage to extort her. A brutal 7-year legal battle raged through courts from Denmark to the United States. Reventlow demanded $5 million and sole custody. Lance grew up surrounded by court orders, trust managers, cold lawyers, and constant flights between continents. The boy never truly had a home. When Barbara finally won custody in 1945, she did not know how to be a mother. She loved her son, but she expressed that love exactly the way her father and grandfather had done with her. She replaced emotional presence with expensive material things. Barbara bought Lance the most lavish toys and took him on extravagant vacations. But she was constantly absent, dealing with nervous breakdowns, trips to rehab, and the demands of new lovers. Lance grew up wandering through vast estates. He was closer to his nannies and the household staff than he was to his own mother. Little Lance inherited exactly the same loneliness, the same sense of displacement, and the same fear of abandonment as Barbara. And just like his mother, Lance sought relief through dangerous, subconsciously self-destructive behaviors. Where Barbara used pills, starvation, and reckless marriages to numb the pain, Lance turned to speed. He founded the Scarab racing team, competed in the most dangerous motor races in the world, and became an amateur pilot. He constantly lived on the edge of life and death. It was as if he was desperately trying to feel something real in a life suffocated by the artificial comfort of money. On July 24, 1972, a small plane carrying Lance Reventlow crashed into the snowy mountains of Aspen, Colorado, during a severe storm. Lance died at the age of 36. When the news of her only son's death reached Barbara at her Sidi Hosni palace in Tangier, she completely collapsed. It was not just the unbearable grief of losing a child. It was the moment the Woolworth curse officially completed its cruel, 3-generation cycle. It began with the shadowy death of Edna Woolworth at 33 in a locked room. It continued through a lifetime of Barbara Hutton destroying herself in silk and solitude. And it finally ended with the image of Lance Reventlow, dead on a desolate mountain at 36. The tragic end of Lance is the most ruthless proof of a harsh reality. Massive wealth and trust funds can protect a child from material poverty, but they are completely powerless to protect a child from emotional poverty. Barbara spent her entire life running from her mother's past, only to unintentionally recreate that exact same loneliness for her son. After Lance's death, Barbara completely let go of life. She closed the doors to her room and lay in bed for the last 7 years of her life, simply waiting for death to arrive as a final release. The final price and a legacy of ruin. When looking back at Barbara Hutton's life, people usually do a simple financial calculation. She started with $50 million. After 7 marriages, thousands of parties, dozens of estates, and countless jewels, all that remained in 1979 was $3,500. Society concluded she was the greatest spendthrift in American history. But if you look at it through the lens of sociology and psychology, the hundreds of millions in inflation-adjusted dollars that Barbara squandered was not pure spending. It was an astronomical medical bill for a sick soul that never healed. It was not just her husbands who drained her. The entire system surrounding her, from lawyers and financial advisors to estate managers and high society friends, all participated in an organized embezzlement of her wealth. They capitalized on the heiress's mental decline. In her final years in Tangier and Los Angeles, while Barbara lay in a stupor induced by morphine and other medications, blank checks were continuously signed. Priceless paintings and emeralds quietly vanished from her collections. Barbara knew what was happening. In a privately published book of poetry titled The Enchanted, which she wrote anonymously in 1934, the young heiress described herself with bitter clarity. She wrote of being a broken doll made of gold, glued back together with sweet lies, sitting in a glass case for the world to judge, a toy with no right to speak. She understood her role perfectly. She knew she was a doll meant to be displayed. Her reckless spending was actually a form of public rebellion against the fortune that had crushed her life. Because money could not bring her father's love, it could not bring her mother back to life, it could not keep Cary Grant, and it could not save Lance. Keeping the money had become completely meaningless to her. Let us briefly compare Barbara Hutton to another famous heiress of her era, Doris Duke. Doris Duke was the heiress to the American Tobacco Company. She also inherited a massive fortune, lost her father at a young age, endured failed marriages including one to Porfirio Rubirosa himself, and lost her only child. But unlike Barbara, Doris Duke reacted to her trauma with extreme defense mechanisms. She became stingy and highly suspicious of everyone. She turned her estates into fortresses and personally controlled every single dollar until the day she died. 2 women, 2 different escapes from the exact same disease of having too much money and too little love. Doris Duke chose to become a cold controller. Barbara Hutton chose to be a candle, burning herself down just to buy fleeting illusions of warmth. The decline of the Woolworth family fortune paralleled the decline of Barbara herself. The F.W. Woolworth Company, the 5-and-dime retail empire that dominated America for half a century, could not adapt to changing times. The stores that had fed the entire Woolworth dynasty began closing one by one in the 1970s and 1980s, before vanishing from the market entirely in 1997. The empire built by the iron discipline of her grandfather, Frank Woolworth, completely collapsed after just 2 generations. He had created a perfect system for making money, but he had failed to create a system for raising the people who would inherit it. When money cannot heal the wound, we return to the central question we asked at the beginning. Why would a woman who could buy anything in the world continuously choose terrible men, fail to learn from 7 marriages, and leave that exact same wound for the next generation? Because the lesson was never about a bad taste in men. Barbara Hutton did not fail because she was naive or unlucky. She failed because the script of her life was already written when she was 4 years old. It was written in the silent bedroom of her late mother and in the cold absence of her philandering father. Her curse was not the money itself. It was the cruel combination of deep emotional trauma and an unlimited fortune that allowed her to avoid healing it. Money could buy European royal titles. It could buy the 12-acre Winfield House estate in the heart of London. It could buy the diamond crowns of the Romanov dynasty and the most luxurious suites at the Beverly Wilshire. But money was completely powerless to build personal boundaries, a healthy sense of self-respect, or the capacity to accept a genuine kind of love. When we look at the most famous photograph of Barbara Hutton, Taken by Cecil Beaton at the City Hosni Palace, we see her sitting on a gilded throne. She is wearing a sparkling emerald tiara, surrounded by silk carpets and priceless artifacts. But we do not see a proud heiress. We see a 4-year-old child playing dress-up in a queen's clothes, trembling and entirely alone in a world of cold luxury. The surviving legacy of Barbara Hutton today is not the bankrupt Woolworth brand, nor is it the $3,500 left in her final bank account. Winfield House, the mansion she built in London and later sold to the U.S. government for exactly $1, still stands today as the official residence of the American ambassador to the UK. The Woolworth building still reaches high into the Manhattan sky, though it has been converted into luxury penthouses for the new billionaire class. The true legacy Barbara Hutton left to the world is a devastating lesson about the nature of privilege. If a child is not loved simply for who they are, you can hand them a world made of solid gold, and they will still spend the rest of their life burning it to the ground just to buy the genuine embrace they never received.